So Dave asked me to talk about some agronomic benefits of planters, and you know what? This is a planter clinic. So he asked me to talk about some economics and agronomics of proper planter setup, and I think it's important to talk about that. I'm going to talk about things today that aren't going to be new to you, and I'm sure a lot of things you've heard about, but you know what? It's good review, and we're on the cusp of going back to the field to plant, and there's some things today I think are good reminders. It's kind of like the monitor. Chad just got done going over the 2630 with you, and you know what I found in dealing with precision equipment is if you don't look at something for 11 months and you come back to it, you forget what you did. Right, John Bickle, John Leave, he deals in precision ag. Chad, isn't that the problem? We forget what we do. And so I think it's a good reminder today to see some things that help us learn or remind ourselves what to do on planter setups. So, I'll look backwards. Let me start with this. How many in here raise corn? Everybody in here, raise your hand if you raise corn. Okay, if you don't, I start calling on you. We all raise corn in here, right? It's hard to see because of lighting, but which corn stand would you rather have? I mean, my 7-year-old can tell me what would be better, right? Which corn stand would you rather have? Well, we obviously want this one on the right, but why do we want that one on the right? Why do we want more even? That's right, this one here has a bunch of doubles and skips and not an even stand. If you go out there and plant 35,000 on your planter, do you want to harvest 35,000 ears or do you want to harvest 30,000 ears? When we're paying $3 a thousand roughly for seed corn, do you want to harvest them all or part of them? So the goal is to harvest all of them. And there's a lot of things, oh, there we go, now everybody will be asleep. So the goal is we want every plant to set an ear. And if we don't do a good job with the planter, we're not going to harvest ears. And we got some slides to talk about that here. Okay? What we're after is ear count. Ear count equals yield. You aren't harvesting plants, you're harvesting ears. You aren't harvesting plants unless you're chopping silage. And their goal is to get every ear or every stalk to set an ear. And so we're going to talk about some things that are important to me. We used to travel the country, John and I both, we'd been from South Dakota and Iowa and all over the Midwest 10 years ago putting on planter clinics to teach people some little things you can do to affect your drop, your spacing, and that sort of thing. And you know what? We're an independent agronomy firm, okay? We're not here to sell you anything. We're not here to sell you any products. We're here to help you find solutions. And I'll tell you what, in working with these guys at Troxel, you have a good resource stand at the back of this room that can help you guys do some planter setups, and it's something that shouldn't be overlooked. 10 years ago when we did these clinics, what I used to say is the planter pass is a sacred pass because you only get one shot to do it. You get 2 shots if you have to replant, or if you get flooded out, you have to do it again, but your potential is never like the first. So you only get one chance to do it right. And so a lot of sins are created because the planter isn't set up correctly. Keep going backwards, John. Anybody in here remember the Meter Max stand from years ago? I mean, when did that start, John? 15 years ago at least? Anybody here remember the Meter Max stand? Matter of fact, don't you guys still have them? Or nobody wants to admit they still have them? Has anybody heard of the Meter Max stand?
What are they used for?
What are they used for? What's the Meter Max stand used for? Nobody knows?
Somebody said testing meters in the back.
Testing meters. Why did we do that? Because the Meter Max stand was birthed because of dissatisfaction with planter performance. So the Meter Max stand was created to help meters calibrate, so we do a better job of singulation, so we aren't picking up doubles, we aren't leaving skips, and we aren't creating scenarios like this on the right. And the whole point of this picture is to show you that if you have proper spacing, so these ears are laid out right beside the stalk, and these ears are laid out right beside the stalk. And a properly calibrated meter, whether it's a finger meter or even a vacuum meter, can give you better singulation before it ever hits a seed tube, okay? And if you have proper singulation, you'll achieve a more uniform and a more consistent ear size. And if you don't pay attention to that, you'll get doubles, you'll get triples, and then you'll get unharvestable ears and you have blanks. And so you leave yield potential on the table. So it really pleads a case to do a good job of calibrating meters. This is just another picture to demonstrate that. Of course, the answer is on the screen, but every 1,000 ears is worth about how many bushel of corn? Of course, the answer is up there.
It's a trick question.
It's a trick question. Make sure you're still awake. So every 1,000 ears is about 7 bushel, right? So if we do a poor job of planting, poor job of singulation and spacing, and if we leave 2,000 or 3,000 on the table because we didn't place it right, firm it right, get rid of trash right, calibrate the meter right, for every 1,000 you're not setting an ear on, you're leaving about 1,000 bushel on the table, or 7 bushel on the table. Okay? Of course, the answer is also on the screen, but if you want to evaluate stand counts, does anybody know how to do that on 30-inch corn? And I know there's some 20-inch corn guys in here, but how do we do that on 30-inch corn? And many of you have probably done it. If you haven't done it, you should learn how to do it because it's really important to evaluate your own operation. But if you measure off 17 feet 5 inches in 30-inch corn, that's 1,000th of an acre. If you count every plant in that 17 feet 5, that's your population. So if you count 30 plants, that's 30,000 population. Count 35, it's 30,000 or 35,000 population. If you're on 20-inch corn, what is it, John? 22 feet 3.
Hold on a second, I'll tell you. I got a calculator.
John will calculate. It's 22 something. But the bottom line is you need to know how to evaluate that. So this picture shows if you do a good job of spacing, you want a more consistent ear count size versus this one. I mean, it doesn't take rocket science to figure that out. Now, let me ask you this. This is about economics too, right? So if every 1,000 ears is worth 7 bushel roughly, the industry wants us to plant more and more and more all the time, right? So the seed industry wants us to plant 35s and 36s and 37s all the time. We get that pressure to us. The seed companies are telling us you need to be pushing populations. What's a good population in 30-inch corn? What's that? Somebody said something. What's a good population in 30-inch corn? 32,000. You know what? That is a good population in 30-inch corn. You know what? If I picked up 7 bushel for every 1,000 more ears, why not plant 38,000? If I go from 32 to 38, heck, that's another 40-some bushel of corn, right? So why not do that? Why wouldn't you? Mark, why wouldn't you do that? It'd be more challenged. You know why? You run out of real estate. There's only so much real estate that you're farming in 30-inch corn. And if you start increasing population, you all know this, there's a point of diminishing returns. I only bring this up because I'll tell you what we found. We build a lot of seeding prescriptions, and I'm going to show you a couple slides here on our premise for building those. But I'll tell you what, on our seeding prescriptions, we put in a lot of test strips in our prescriptions to evaluate things for ourselves. And I'll tell you, the high seeding rates don't always prevail. So the 35s and 36s are not the most economic, not the highest yield, not always the best choice. And a lot of times, the rates that we see to break off our point of diminishing returns is usually around 33, 34, 35 tops. Just because you run out of real estate. You ramp up your population, you cram in your plant-to-plant spacing, and it becomes competitive to each other. Okay? And a lot of that's contrary to what the industry wants us to do. They want us to plant higher and higher pops. And you can do that if you can manage the spacing and if you can manage real estate. You know, on 20-inch corn, you can support a slightly higher population. But you know what 20-inch corn offers you is the ability to maximize or manage more real estate. So you can up your population and stretch your spacing out so you set a bigger tree trunk so it can support a bigger ear. That's a real advantage on 20-inch corn. So there's only so much real estate you can capitalize on 30. And I think that's really important that you guys take that message home. Okay, if you did not have capabilities of planting variable rate corn, what population would you plant? What would you plant? What did I just get done talking about? Where would I generally want to be? In the low 30s? If I was not capable of variable rate in most soils, not knowing all your soils, I would probably, what we see is 33, 34,000 is where things peak out. I would have a really hard time planting much higher than that. Unless we're planting the 1st of April and you want to mitigate some risk. If you're capable of variable rate seed and have variable soils, I think you need to use that technology to your benefit. If you don't farm variable soils and have farms that are flat as this floor and consistently one soil type, there's no need to variable rate your seed. Okay? Now few people have that, most of us don't. How many in here have a lot of farms that's consistently the same from one end to the next? Nobody, right? Unless you farm in Paulding County, Ohio, or Eastern Allen County and Woodburn, but that's very few people. If you have variation in soil type, you know what drives populations? You know what populations are influenced by? What can support or not support high or lower populations? What does it take? The answer is kind of in front of us here again. It's water. Water influences our populations. John built this slide at 3 in the morning. He had an epiphany one morning. It's like, man, this is a good visual. So I'll give him credit. So you know what we do? It's as simple as this. The low populations go on the high ground because those are generally the Glenwoods and the Blounts. They dry out. The clay knobs, the sand ridges, they dry out. They can't support as many plants. The Poamos, the Del Reys, the low ground that has higher organic matter, better water holding capacity, those can support a lot more plants. That's where the water goes also. So if we build a prescription, or if you have the ability to do variable rate seed, what we have found that works the best is to break things down by high, medium, and low ground and fit populations to that. And by the way, which quite frankly is elevation, what else follows elevation in your fields? What other model in your fields follows elevation? What's that?
Fertility.
Fertility, but that's specifically tied to what? Your fertility changes by what? What is elevation model? I got you stumped.
Drive up and down, is it one that we drove down here?
They're in a field around here that doesn't have this. We all have different soil types. Elevation will model your soil types. So that's the best representation of the soil types in your fields, and that's what we fit prescriptions to. This field right here, if I was to string a line from A to B and walk left to right, as I'm walking across this line, this is the elevation I'm going to encompass. High ground, transition ground, here's a low pocket, here's high ground, we go down into low ground. We make our populations fit that. So this little high knob right here, this area right here, we put 29,000 on this particular prescription. This low ground right here, which is this low, we put 36 there because it can support more plants. We've done this time and time again, and this consistently proves to us the right way to do it. So if you are capable of variable rate, that's something I would really consider using. If you have the ability, it's good utilization of technology. These guys at the back of the room are good about helping you set your monitors up and set your equipment up to be able to accommodate that. So, in the essence of time, let's keep moving. We need to focus on, so I touched a little bit on technology. I want to talk about the importance of emergence and consistency and using our planters to get that. So this is data from University of Illinois. Purdue's done research. We've done some plots. And the data suggests that you can have 20 to 25% loss if you're more than 2 leaf stages behind. Okay, so this stand right here, you got these 2 plants that are behind this one. That's about 2 leaf stages behind. And I would go so far to say if a neighboring corn plant is more than 1 collar behind the next, it's a weed. If it's more than 1 collar behind, it's a weed. So our goal is to get everything to fire together. How many hours in time do you want to see every kernel and every plant emerge within itself? You want to see all your corn plants emerge, come out of the ground in what kind of time frame? Anybody have an idea? What kind of time frame? We got a quiet crowd today.
They all grow corn.
You all grow corn, right? 24 hours. That's a good answer. You know, we used to say 10 years ago, 48 hours, but it needs to be 24 hours. You want everything to fire within 24 hours of each other if you can pick that. That's to eliminate problems like this, eliminate corn being more than a collar behind. You know, John and I just got back from Commodity Classic in New Orleans last week, and the Commodity Classic group are the grain group. So you got corn, soybean, wheat, sorghum. And they have a special awards program that does what? Well, they reward guys for yield. So they have National Corn Growers Yield Awards, right? So wasn't there a new record this year, John?
532.
532 was a record yield, okay? We all are in a pursuit for 300 bushel corn, or to try to get to 300 or have some consistency towards 300. You know what the corn growers groups are starting to say? If you want to push for higher yields, whether that's 300 or 350, or try for a corn grower's yield, you know what they're saying? Emergence windows need to be within 2 hours. Your corn needs to come out of the ground within 2 hours of the next plant. That's pretty challenging. But if you want to be able to support the ears and fill those ears that's necessary, you need to get emergence that tight. And I'd say 24 hours is a very good goal, and that's what we need to be thinking about. But I tell you what, I would argue it starts with the planter and some adjustments on the planter and that sacred pass. What we're trying to do is perfect the seed drop, and there's a lot of things that affect our seed drop. This picture right here, this red line shows that if a seed falls down that seed tube, if you get ricochet in that seed tube, that's going to affect your spacing. It's going to create doubles. That's not what it's designed to do. These seed tubes, everybody's seen these on our planter. You notice how they have a curve at the bottom of them? Does anybody know why there's a curve on that seed tube? Any idea? No ideas why there's a curve on that seed tube other than it just looks pretty? You know, that seed tube is designed for a seed to fall out of that thing and hit the ground at 0 velocity as that planter's traveling at what speed? 5, I heard. The number is between 4.5 and 5 miles an hour. If you're planting between 4.5 and 5 miles an hour, when that kernel falls out of that seed tube and hits the furrow, it hits it at 0 velocity, so it stops. And if you go faster than that, what's going to happen? A lot of things can happen. You get bounce, you get roll, you don't get good firming action, you can't manage residue that well. There's a lot of things that affect drop. And there's several things I listed. I'm going to run through some wear items that I think are really important that are relative to that. But I want to stress the importance of speed. Oh, that's not good. It's like technology. When your auto steer doesn't work, you call Chad or you sit at the end of the field. John will fix it. So, you just breathed on it?
He's got to use his mouse today because I forgot his
I did it again.
So he's using my mouse. Hit escape. And then just hit the down arrow. Use the down arrow, drop the mouse.
To me, it's like you don't turn the TV on if you can't find a remote. And if your auto steer doesn't work, you're dead in the water and you won't plant, right? because nobody knows how to drive anymore. We got to have auto steer. So singulation is fine. I'm going to skip ahead on this a little bit. Actually, I want to come to this and then go back. So I talked about speed, and I think this is important. That seed tube is designed for seed to fall out of that tube at zero velocity, traveling between 4.5 and 5 miles an hour. Now, I've ridden in and been around the exact emerge planters that are capable of running 8 to 10 mile an hour, and that's cruising planting corn. Particularly if you get out of an 8 mile an hour planter and move back into 4.5, it's really, really tough. But that's a totally different ball game. And most of our planters today are designed with that style of seed tube. And I put this slide up here because what I want to point out is speed kills, right? Speed kills in racing. It kills if you're running too fast on the highway. It's a negative thing. Think about this. At 6 miles an hour, you're covering 8.8 feet per second. All right? If you're planting 30,000 population, which by the way, not a lot of us plant even that light. If you're planting 30,000 population at 6, which is too fast, that's dropping 15 seeds a second. 15 seeds a second. Has anybody ever seen a meter on a meter max stand being calibrated? Has anybody ever seen one before? That is cruising. If you watch a meter turning at 4.5, it is amazing that thing can singulate seed. And a slight increase, like it says here, every mile an hour half increase, there's been data that shows you're giving up 2 to 5 bushel just because you're giving up singulation. So I can't stress enough the importance of slowing down. And I know we all have a lot to do. We have a lot of acres to cover, and the rainstorm's coming and you got to get done. But you need to plant between 4.5 and 5. Otherwise, you're negating what the planter is designed to do. The other thing I mentioned yesterday, with our weather patterns and our abnormalities that we deal with, we think you need to be equipped to plant corn in 7 days. And if you're not equipped to plant corn in 7 days, you need to make yourself equipped to plant corn in 7 days. Is Dave in here? Dave, you're welcome for that. So you need a second planter or a bigger planter, because we literally have 7 days anymore to plant corn. It might be 4 in April and 3 in May, but we have about a week to get our corn in the ground, and you need to be equipped to do that so you don't plant 6 mile an hour. Okay? So I'm going to jump back here real quick. Anybody remember these monitors? Anybody remember those? What were those, John? 250s and
100, 150, 200, 250. Hey, Dave, did you have one of those? Yeah.
Yeah, so what do we have those for? What was the goal of those monitors? Tell if you're planting right.
Yeah.
Tell you if the rhodium was out of corn. As long as that thing wasn't hollering at you, you're good. You kept rock and rolling. Are we way beyond this today? Is it a lot more important than that today? Why do you think the meter calibration and planter setup business was created? Because of dissatisfaction with placement and performance. Today, we have monitors, and Chad just went through this with you. We have monitors that measure skips, multiples, coefficient of variation, down pressure, all that kind of stuff, because we know what the impact is to our bottom line. And I would argue this, if I was planting corn, you can't only rely on the monitor. The monitor is your tip-off of whether you need to get out and look or not. I encourage you to get out and look often, early and often, often and early. Even going so far as when you switch fields, I would check behind that planter after you switch fields, because conditions change by humidity, ground conditions, temperature, that all affects these, and you need to get off and look. So I'm going to run through real quick on some wear items, some things that I think are important, some things that are often overlooked, and I think you should pay attention to these on your planter. Meters and vac meters and finger meters. I know we've transitioned more into vacuum meters today, not so many finger pickup meters, but I want to tell you a couple things I've noticed in the past, or what I would encourage you to do. Number one, don't leave corn in your planter at the end of the season and then pull it out in the spring and then dump the corn out of the box. Clean your planters out, clean your meters out. They draw moisture, that rust fingers up, you take the discs out of your vac meters. If I had a finger pickup planter or a vacuum planter, I would take the discs out or the meters out, and I'd put them in a plastic tub, and I'd put them in my heated shop, and I'd leave them in there all winter. You need to treat them like gold. If you leave them in your shop or leave them in your planter, they warp, seals dry rot and crack because they got pressure on them all winter long. And backing plates warp, discs warp, and that all affects flowability. And it's easy maintenance, it's not that difficult. You change the oil in your truck, this is changing oil in your planter. Take that stuff out, treat it right, and it'll take care of you. And it'll last a lot longer. Opening discs, this is a common problem area. If opening discs, brand new discs are 15 inches in diameter. The rule of thumb is when they're 14 and a half, you should replace them. Okay, so this is a worn disc on top of a new disc. It's too cheap of an item not to replace. The rule of thumb is, in most soils, based on abrasiveness and wear, a set of double disc openers will generally last 100 acres. So 100 acres a row is usually a good rule of thumb for what they'll last. But I encourage you to check those. If you're at any doubt on whether they're worn, replace them. They're too cheap not to replace because that all affects your true V trench. The other plug I'll put in, I would only buy John Deere disc openers, period. Because they're a better quality steel, they do a better quality job of manufacturing. There's cheaper discs out there, and there's some aftermarket ones you can buy, and I've seen those come right from their factory warped. Warped discs right from the factory. John Deere discs are rock solid, consistent. I would only buy John Deere discs. If an easy way to check whether your discs are wore without taking them off the planter is you can take a business card and slide it in from the top opening, and where it meets the disc, draw a line. Come in on the back side, slide it in where it meets the disc, or where it pinches together, and draw a line. If you have between 2 and 2.5 inches of contact, they're good. If you have less than that, you need to be thinking about replacing them. Don't hold back on replacing those. I know none of you guys will let your planters get this kind of wear, but you need to pay attention to bearings and bushings on your rocker arms, on your gauge wheels, because those are wear and tear items. And you don't want W bottoms, because then you got seed depth at all kind of variations, and you talk about a disaster on emergence on having a W bottom. So you need consistency, and it takes good bearings and good equipment to do that. Seed tubes. This is also a common overlooked item. We all have wear guards in between our double disc openers that protect the seed tube. As our seed discs wear, it wears into the seed tube guard, and then it wears into the seed tubes. See this seed tube here that's got wear on both sides compared to a new one? When that wears, that plastic starts to curl in. Guess what that plastic does when it starts to curl in? The seed comes down that seed tube, it hits that plastic, and it kicks it out of the seed furrow. Or it rolls down the seed furrow, and it affects your stand. Again, too cheap not to replace. Parallel arms. I put this up here because this is a huge pet peeve of mine. How many in here, when you plant your cornfields, leave the planter in the ground while you're turning the corner? How many round their corners off with the planter in the ground? Or who's afraid to admit they do that? Don't do that. Don't do that. Why is that? It bends row units. That puts a lot of pressure on there, and it bends row units. And when a row unit gets bent, nothing is aligned. You're not aligned with your fertilizer opener, your double disc openers aren't aligned with your closing wheels. It messes up your alignment. Now the newer planters are there's not as much weight hanging on them, so they don't bend as easy, but they're still prone to that. Don't turn with the planter in the ground. A level planter, this is also important. You know, most planters today that you guys are farming with are probably 2-point hitch because they're 12, 16, 24 rows. And this is something that's often overlooked, is keeping the main frame of the planter level, keeping your parallel arms level, and keeping the overall planter level. And here's what can happen, and I see this a lot. If it's nosing down like this picture, and it's not level, there's a lot of lead colders on planters, and I know a lot of you guys in here probably have lead colders on your planter. If you nose down like that too far, your lead colder's running deeper than your double disc openers, and then you create a false bottom, and your seed falls to the false bottom, and you have an uneven, your depth is all inconsistent, and then they don't fire together. So having a level planter is really, really important. Closing wheels, what I want to touch on here, we notice this a lot. The bushings in the closing wheel brackets, as they wear, they start to twist or get off center. And we see a lot of planters that have some acres on them or some age that they aren't tracking true to the double disc openers. And when they're not tracking true to double disc openers, they don't close correctly. Particularly if you're running a spaded wheel like this, for example, and that I've seen where the spaded wheel's running right on top of the row and it's flicking the seed out. It's knocking the seed out. Or we just don't do a good job of closure, and then you have uneven moisture because of that, and things don't fire evenly because of uneven moisture. Down pressure. This is a common question we get a lot. What's the right amount of down pressure? A lot of the new planters today and the new setups, particularly with the 2630, you can monitor what your down pressure is and you can set what it is from the cab. Okay? Most problems arise from too much down pressure. Too much down pressure pinches the double disc openers too tight, creates sidewall compaction, you got tomahawked roots, you don't get into starter fertilizer, it creates all kinds of problems. The error is to put too much on. Okay, with new monitors today, we can track that, we can record that. And you know, the tendency is on the spring down pressures, there was, 3 notches on there. There was like a high, medium, and low pressure. Well, there was always a lot of tendency to put it on the highest pressure setting just to hold that thing in the ground. And I'll tell you, usually that's wrong. Generally what we see is 100 to 125 pounds is all the down pressure you need. Otherwise you get too much. Now ground conditions can dictate that, but you just need to be cautious on that. If you aren't sure what your down pressure is, I'll tell you an easy way to check. If you put the planter in the ground like this picture shows and drive ahead, stop, get off the tractor, walk around to the planter, grab onto this gauge wheel. If you can turn that thing with a little bit of effort, that's generally the right amount of down pressure. If you can barely turn that thing, it's probably too much. And if you can turn it real easy, it's probably not enough. And that's the poor man's way of checking it, but that's not a bad way to check your down pressure. So keep that in mind. Seed firmers. I would not plant corn without seed firmers. This is an old picture of an old set of seed firmers, but the principle is still the same. I would never plant corn without seed firmers. On this slide it shows, there was data years ago that showed a 6 to 7 bushel advantage just by having row cleaners on your planter. I can attest to that. We've seen that. I would not plant corn without them. Why wouldn't you? Why not plant without seed firmers? Well, this is why. A seed firmer is going to firm every kernel into moisture so you're consistent and your depth is consistent and they'll germ consistently. If you don't have firmers, particularly if you have larger seed like large rounds or large flats, when they drop in that furrow, guess what you get underneath them? Air pockets. You get air pockets underneath those kernels and they don't imbibe moisture at the same time and they don't fire together and you have inconsistency. A firmer will eliminate that. If you don't have firmers on your planter, I'd call these guys, I'd buy them and I'd put them on. They're too cheap not to have. Again, it goes toward your sacred pass. And lastly, row cleaners. If you are raising corn after corn, or if you're a no-tiller in here, I would definitely have row cleaners on my planter. And we can get in discussions on what's the right kind, what works well, what doesn't work well, but I would definitely have row cleaners. And the reason is to manage trash. If you hairpin trash in the furrow like this picture here, guess what that residue is? That residue is a straw to the outside sucking moisture right out of your trench. And if you have inconsistency in residue, you'll have uneven moisture in that seed trench that you don't even see, and corn fires all inconsistency. row cleaners manage that. Matter of fact, several years ago, we did a bunch of plot work. I could almost demonstrate value in row cleaners on conventionally tilled soils. Corn after beans conventionally tilled, just managing dirt clods to make the row units run smoother, give a better seed bed and consistency. Row cleaners are a pretty valuable piece. I think that's all I had. It was on top of my head. Unless there's something I forgot about. I made notes because I had some good questions. I think about a lot of things that I don't say because I take for granted and I forget to say them. Unless there's any questions that you guys have.
Is there any questions from anybody? I want to thank Greg and his team for coming today, and John.